Unit 3 Politics, Monarchy and Oligarchy. We will do the middle school lesson and then take it to the next level. Get a little weird, maybe even controversial as we discuss different ways to view monarchy and oligarchy. As we said in the democracy lesson, human beings are social creatures. We can be very good, love, and kind. We can also be bad, lie, cheat, steal. To prevent these nefarious actions, we need rules. Who's going to make those rules? Who's going to enforce those rules? Thus, as civilizations grow, it requires lawmaking and law enforcing forces, which typically are governments. So, what kind of governments do we want? We discussed democracy, rule of the people. How about monarchy, coming from the Greek words monos and kratos? One rule, one person rules, one person makes the rules, one person enforces the rules, most commonly known as a king. And as I've said previously, which is the unpopular belief, but maybe monarchy isn't that bad. Maybe there's possibly a reason that this was the way of the land for thousands and thousands of years before democracy. I know that might be controversial to some, but we want to explore that idea. It wouldn't have been implemented for so long and lasted for so long if it didn't work for so long. Sure, in America, we have a different view because we overthrew a monarchy to establish our democracy. So we have been bred to believe and ingrained in our mind and brainwashed at times that monarchy bad, monarchy bad. So why not try to question that? Another form of a monarchy that we see every day, that we live through every day, is the owner of a business CEO like Elon Musk. He is the one man that rules Tesla. If you work at McDonald's, there's a boss. That, for all intents and purposes, is a monarchy. You do not get to make the decisions about when to open the store, how long it's going to be open, what the hours are, what you're going to serve, what goes in the secret sauce. And you completely accept that. Every business is the same. You accept that you have a one-person rule, and you go along with it every day, and you collect a paycheck every day, and everything works out in that small setting. So the idea of one person ruling, if we just break it down to that and try to separate from our bias from the King of England, separate from that bias, look at it objectively, you can see that one person ruling, maybe that's not such a bad idea at times. Now, sure, in a monarchy, the people do not govern. The downside is you don't get any say, but I want to design the secret sauce. I want to come up with how much salt we put on the fries. I've got a great new idea for a new burger. That's not going to happen in a monarchy. You do not govern. You just show up, do your thing. But the good news is you do not govern. You don't have to worry about coming up with the next special sauce, the next thing on the menu. You don't have to worry about what rules you have to write for other people. You don't have to worry about telling other people what to do and then enforcing those rules on other people. The boss comes up with the rules, then the boss has to enforce the rules. Sometimes you got to pay the cost to be the boss. It's not always easy having to deal with people. You don't have to deal with any of that. Just show up and do your thing. So, yeah, it's nice to govern, but yeah, it's bad to govern as well. There are pros, there are cons. Another pro to the system of monarchy is less fighting. As we mentioned in the previous lesson, in democracy, the people get to say, and everyone has a different idea. And when people have different ideas, they argue and they fight. Well, guess what? If you don't have any say, there's no reason to argue. And so maybe you live a peaceful life. Maybe possibly that's why monarchies lasted for so long and could still exist today and do exist in the form of our private sector in business. Now, of course, you can't have a terrible boss, and you can't have a tyrannical leader of a country that abuses and oppresses the people. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows. And in a nation, it can be much harder to get away from a tyrannical leader, as we proved in 1776 with our revolution. We pulled it off, but it wasn't easy. Whereas in the private sector, you can just find another job and try to find a new boss. But also, when you think about that, it really does not behoove the monarch to be tyrannical. Sometimes they can get away with it, but often they end up in a grave or overthrown, or their country suffers. So most of the time, it is in the self-interest of the king to act in the interest of the people, just like a business. If you have a terrible business or a terrible boss and employees are leaving, then the boss will not be able to run his business. The boss will either have to change his ways, will go out of business, but in most cases, a boss who lacks leadership, who is tyrannical, will eventually fail. And the market will prove that you need to have a balance between. That is the way the invisible hand of the economy works, and that is also a political way that will work itself out with most kings. Not arguing that we need more kings, but just arguing that, maybe we should explore this idea more. And still, I think the big point that maybe some students may prefer a monarchy is if you're burnt out politics and you hate people arguing all the time, there aren't any politics in a monarchy. You're not involved. You don't have to be involved. There's less arguing. Let's go through a couple more thought examples. In a monarchy, then we'll just look at McDonald's, where there's one boss. Everything is on the line for that boss. If the business fails, he fails. You can just go find another minimum wage job. No sweat off your back. If his $1 million business fails, his life is ruined. His family suffers. His children suffer. It is very stressful. It is very tough. It is very difficult. For you, in living in this monarchy at McDonald's, you don't have to go through that. You're not worried about the taxes. You're not worried about food inspectors. You're not worried about unruly employees or angry customers, or the shipment of cheeseburgers didn't arrive on time. What are we going to do? Working late nights all throughout the hours, never seeing your kids. In a monarchy, like this business, all the pressure and stress is on the king and not the people. Now just expand that idea to a nation. Again, he has to worry about managing the nation. You don't have to worry about managing the nation. Go milk the cows. Go plow the fields. Go make swords. Whatever it is you do, just do your thing and not worry about all the regulations and taxes and border disputes and issues between neighbors. It's not up to you. You don't have to worry about it. Continue our thought experiment about monarchies. Let's imagine that one McDonald's has a monarchy where one person's making all the decisions for that McDonald's. And then let's imagine a McDonald's run by the people, a democracy, where the decision making is made up by the employees. Which one do you think is going to be more efficient, more effective, more productive? So in the monarchy, we have one person making all the decisions, and everything hangs in the balance on this one person. Now, also, when we think about, well, how did this one person get to this position? It's more than likely by making right moves throughout his life and getting into that position, accumulating enough wealth, and to secure the ability to get there. So they have a track record of making pragmatic, practical decisions based on statistics and data. They don't just willy-nilly let their emotions rule. If they did, they would have never gotten to that position. If they did, they more than likely would have went out of business pretty quick. The fact that they are still in business means that they understand decision making and then how to carry out those decisions. And it all lays on that person. Seems like this would be a very productive, effective way of running businesses, and that's the way most businesses are. They are run by a proprietor, a sole proprietor, sometimes a partnership, but often there's one man at the top guiding the vision of the company. Now let's compare that to a McDonald's that makes all of the decisions through a democratic process. All decision making is made by the people with equal rights and say. Now, one way to look at it is if you have more minds, you could come up with more ideas, and it could be a better situation in terms of one brain is not as good as 10 brains. Now, that neglects the fact that one brain that we have is pretty straightforward, pretty analytical in the king, and less likely to be emotional. Whereas if we add more minds, sure, we may get some scientists. We may get some smart kids at the fryer. But we're also going to add the possibility of those minds being emotional and not necessarily making statistical or analytical decisions, very much like we get in a nation with a democracy. Not everyone votes based on the data. Not everyone votes based on science. Many votes are cast emotionally. Many votes are cast based on one specific thing and completely neglect others. Everyone is voting on everything. Is everyone studying everything? If someone is emotionally invested into cheeseburgers, they're not focusing on, yeah, but what about shipping? What about prices? What about the drive-through? I don't know. All I know about is cheeseburgers. And so that person may be very smart when it comes to cheeseburgers, but they're also going to cast votes based on everything else that is done in this business. And their vote could sway the company in the wrong direction. And there's constantly debates and going over every single thing. And that leads to arguments. Whereas with a king, what I say goes. There's no arguing. Here it is. Here are the rules. Let's go. Get it moving. Get to work. Over here, we're debating and arguing constantly about what to do. That is very time consuming. And in a business, you need to be expedient. And in a business, you need to be able to act fast, get things done. And if we're constantly having a democratic process, we're slowing down efficiency. We're slowing down production. We are losing money because we all have to get together. We all have to talk about what we're going to do. We all have to debate and discuss before we can make a decision, before we can move forward. Now, also through this arguing and debate, you're going to create divisions within the groups. We could even have McDonald's political parties. We could have Team Grimace versus Team Hamburglar. And they could be political rivals. And that's going to cause conflict. And even if we don't break into groups, which you see in many businesses, we see where cliques form. Even if cliques are not formed, these arguments are going to lead to a stressful environment, a stressful emotional environment where even if the decision making is done right, it's a toxic workforce and not a fun place to work. And thus, the business practices aren't at their best level. You don't want your employees stressed out. That's democracy. Look at our democracy today. Are people a little stressed out? Have people been a little stressed out heading into the election, having to make this big decision? Even after the decision is made and it's done, all right, can we move on? No, we still have half of the nation that's stressed out. And having all those stressed out people around stresses out the people that aren't stressed out. And it creates a negative atmosphere. Is that the McDonald's you want to go into as a customer? Hey, let's go into that McDonald's where they're always complaining and they're upset and they always get my order wrong because they're always so sad and depressed and angry. Which one do you think is going to make more money? Which one do you think is going to be more productive? A McDonald's run by a CEO or a monarch, or a McDonald's run democratically? I think this is a no-brainer. Now, if we expand that, if this idea works in this small sample, why could it not work on a larger scale? Well, it did work at a larger scale because for thousands of years, most nations had monarchies. The monarch did its basic task and let people do things they wanted to do, whether it was plowing fields, studying philosophy, inventing math and science. All of those things were able to take place and prosper in monarchies. And they do today, just in the form of business. Now, again, if we go over that, if democratic principles and ideas don't work in the small scale at McDonald's, I mean, we're talking about just a store, then how is that supposed to work for 330 million people across one of the biggest land masses in the world? If it cannot function properly, if democracy cannot function properly in a tiny little building, how is it supposed to function properly across 50 states, 50 million people? It functions, but is it the best? It probably creates the most fair and equal, or at least the perception of equality, but is it the best? Just something to think about. Oligarchy, Greek word oligos, few, kratos, rule. So imagine multiple kings. The few rule, not the people. So it's not a democracy. It's not a monarchy because it's not one, but it's few. Often in the form of elites, political insiders, technocrats, experts. They are not necessarily beholden to what the people say. They do not have to listen to what the people say. They carry out policy based on their vision. They carry out policy based on their principles and their ideas. So it's very much like a monarchy, but just adding a couple more chefs, cooks in the kitchen. Bernie Sanders back in the news, and Bernie Sanders says, hey, we aren't a democracy. And he's been saying this for years. He's saying, hey, we're an oligarchy, folks. This country, the policies, look at the plans. And he just says, open your eyes and look at it. Yes, we're told it's a democracy. Yes, we get to vote every year and often, and 4 years for a president and 2 years for the House of Representatives, and you elect the politician. But is that politician really working for you? Is that politician really listening to you or interest groups? And just look at it. If we're a democracy, these wars, do the people of America want wars? If the answer is no, then how are we a democracy? Who's making the decision to go to these wars and start these wars? Is it the few? Is it the oligarchy? Look at the border. Do the American people want the border to be an issue? Do they want to leave it wide open? Do they want it unregulated? If the answer is no, then this isn't a democracy. Who is making these decisions? So we look at the modern US and ask the question, just to explore. We don't know for sure, but is it an oligarchy that rules this nation? Yes, we vote. Yes, we elect politicians and they pass laws and rules for us. The legislative branch will make the laws. We elect them. The executive branch will then carry those laws out. We enforce them. But underneath each of these branches is a large mass blob of bureaucracy, departments, workers, thousands and thousands of government employees that work for the guy you elected to make the laws. Thousands and thousands of employees in the executive branch that work for the president that then carry out and enforce the laws every single day. How do you know that those people underneath aren't doing what they want to do in the sense of an oligarchy, where these few people in the bureaucracy are actually the ones making the decisions, actually making the policy for the nation? And worse than that, these blue shirt bureaucrats, you didn't vote for them. You voted for the people at the top. But the people down at the bottom are the ones grinding it out, really doing and making all the policies that take place in your real life, and you did not elect them. And some of them have been there forever. Is that democracy or is that oligarchy? Who's ruling? You through your vote and your representatives, or the bureaucrats? Who's carrying out the policy? Who's carrying out the plans? Well, just look at the policy, look at the plans. Is this what the people wanted? Ask yourself that simple question every time you see a new policy by the government and think, did the majority of people want this? If the answer is no, then you must think this possibly could be an oligarchy I'm living in. Now, as we always go through, perfect is the enemy of good. You're going to need bureaucrats, you're going to need employees to carry out all of these policies. You can't just write a law and then throw it up in the air and then it becomes so. Someone has to carry out those laws and make sure that they're practical and that they're implemented in every workplace, in every workspace, in every restaurant, in every home, on every street corner and park. Someone physically has to monitor and make sure that these laws are becoming real, that they are coming to life. So the idea of completely avoiding bureaucrats is impossible. So you have to accept that. You can't have a perfect situation where you vote for every single person. Can't do that. And you can't have a situation where you don't have these bureaucrats. Can't do that. So we can't achieve perfection, but we got to do the best that we can. So maybe what we have is the best that we can. In defense of our possible democracy asterisk democracy, modern democracy, or self-government. Well, we can't say it's a self-government, but whatever it is we have. But always, we don't want to be too harsh on America and our democracy, but we can always get a little bit better. We can always get a little better. How can we fix it? How can we make it better? Again, perfect is the enemy of good. But what are the small little changes that we can do in our country to make it better for ourselves, for our neighbors, for other nations that depend on us, and more importantly, our posterity, our children, our children's children? We have the opportunity and obligation to make decisions today that will help tomorrow. We can make sacrifices today that could help tomorrow. So we vote. And on Tuesday of 2024, November the 5th, people elected a new person and a new group of legislatures to go in, make some laws, new people to carry out the laws that could possibly move back towards a form of more self-government, a more pure form of democracy. How can we do it? Well, the first step was achieved. You voted for something new. You voted for a group of politicians that are planning to carry out a policy that is less bureaucratic, that is more responsive to the needs and demands of the people. So the first thing would be to eliminate as many of the possible oligarchs or the few that are ruling outside of the wants of the people. Define the people that are carrying out policy like war. Define the bureaucrats that are carrying out policy like failed border policies. Remove them and then replace them. Going to be impossible to replace everyone, but a part of Vivek and the Trump administration's plan is to remove these people. Now, it's very hard to fire employees, but one of the ways that they have found that they can remove these permanent seeming dug-in bureaucrats is that if you move a department from, say, Washington, D.C. to Topeka, Kansas, many of those dug-in bureaucrats are not going to move, and they will quit their job, and thus you can put in new people in those positions. So really what we're saying is you're voting for a politician, and that politician then is going to start handpicking and be more micromanaging and picking out the right bureaucrats. There's a lot of fundamental technique in the way that Vivek and the Trump administration plan on doing that. We don't have to get deep in the details, but we do know that it can be done. And by replacing these people that are quasi-oligarchs and returning the power back to the people, it can be done. We can fix it. So you did your part. There's another thing that's happened. The Supreme Court recently ruled that there is no more Chevron deference. This is a landmark Supreme Court ruling in 2024. And what the Chevron deference allowed was that bureaucrats were able to carry out policy independent of really what the legislature said. They had the power to be independent of what the law actually allowed them to do. Those blue shirts, those people in the departments that were unelected, that are actually carrying out the policy every day for years and years, decades, have been allowed to kind of do their own thing, go beyond the law, enforce and implement regulations and restrictions based on what they believed rather than what the law said, rather than what the people wanted. Well, the Supreme Court recently ruled, no, that's not the case. Chevron deference no longer exists. The bureaucrats must stick to the law. The bureaucrats must stick to the law written by the people, elected by the people. This is a country of the people, by the people, for the people, not the bureaucrats, not the quasi-oligarchs. So the country is headed in the right direction. That is a positive. Can't do it anymore, folks. You want to come with your own plans, your own wars, your own borders, start your own country. America belongs to the people, for the people, by the people. More about the oligarchy. You can see an article from 2014 study says U.S. is an oligarchy, not a democracy. Again, I'm not making this stuff up. Just trusting the research. And there was a research done at Cambridge University, a very prestigious university, testing theories of American politics, elites, interest groups, and average citizens. Who do you think rules? The average citizen or the elites and interest groups? And what the Cambridge University study found out in 2014 was this. Multivariate analysis indicates that economic elites and organized groups representing business interests have substantial independent impacts on U.S. government policy, while average citizens and mass-based interest groups, kind of the ones that the average citizen belongs to, have little or no independent influence. That does not sound like a democracy to me. That sounds like an oligarchy. It's the people versus the elite, the people versus the organized interest groups. You may belong to a massive interest group like the NRA, but the smaller interest groups are probably a little more effective. Those few, those oligarchs. A proposed policy, here we go, we look at some specific data and studies. A proposed policy change with low support among the economic elite Americans is adopted only about 18% of the time. So if the elite don't want the policy doesn't pass, the policy isn't carried out. While a proposed change with high support from the elite is adopted 45% of the time. That's quantitative data. That is the numbers. That's not conjecture. That is not anecdotal. That is not subjective. It's just look at the numbers, look at the data. That's the best type of research, quantitative research, where we have numbers and we can evaluate, as opposed to qualitative data. So if the elite want it, they get it. If the elite don't, they don't. So who is getting the policy? Who is running the country? According to Gillens and Page in their Cambridge study, the elites rule. It's 2014. The 10-year-old research, that was 10 years ago. Yeah, it was 10 years ago. What are we waiting on? Has anything changed? Well, that's old. Yeah, it's old. Has it gotten better or worse? What are you waiting on? Well, the Americans took a good step in the right direction. Hopefully, maybe I'm just an optimist. Maybe not. Regardless of which party you support or which candidate you support, the people are waking up, and that is very good for democracy. The people are speaking. That's very good for democracy. The people are tuning in to the policy and the state of the nation and voicing their opinion. That can only be good for a democracy, regardless of the outcomes, regardless of the results. A healthy nation has healthy, educated voters that have plans and policies and can push those policies above the few, above the oligarchs. There it is, monarchy and oligarchy. We went a little different, a little deeper, took it to the next level, went high level. Question, maybe monarchy isn't that bad. We did not say that oligarchy was that good. Maybe someday we can make a defense of oligarchy, but having possibly experienced oligarchy over the last decade, there's a reason why I might be biased and slanted against it.